Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. My alarm goes off at 4:30 a.m. To most people, that time is an unholy alien territory, a part of the night that is meant for sleep. But for me, it is the beginning of my sanctuary. I am a runner, not a casual jogger, but a dedicated, disciplined runner. And the pre-dawn hours are my church. The world is quiet, the air is cool and clean, and the paths are empty. It is in this perfect solitude that I find my focus, my strength, and my peace. My chosen sanctuary is Northwood Park, a sprawling expanse of wooded trails and rolling hills on the edge of the city. During the day, it's a bustling place filled with families and cyclists. But before the sun rises, it belongs to the deer, the foxes, and to me. I know every turn, every incline, every route that snakes across the path. The park in the darkness is not a place of fear for me. It is a place of profound familiarity and control. My only companion on these runs is my phone, strapped to my arm. It runs an app called Stride Strong, a sophisticated tool that tracks my every metric: my pace, my heart rate, my elevation gain, my mileage. I am a data-driven person by nature, and the app provides me with the clean, hard numbers I need to improve. It turns my body into a project, my run into a series of variables to be optimized. This data-driven approach gives me a powerful sense of control over my own physical self. The app has a feature that I've come to rely on. It's called the Ghost Pacer. After each run, the app saves my performance. On my next run, I can choose to compete against a past version of myself. A small, translucent blue avatar appears on the GPS map on my screen, a ghost of my previous self, running the same route at the same pace. My goal is always to beat the ghost, to push myself just a little harder, to be a better version of the person I was yesterday. This ritual is the bedrock of my life. It is a discipline that structures my days and quiets my mind. In a world that is often chaotic and unpredictable, my pre-dawn run is a bastion of order. It is just me, the path, the data, and the quiet, ghostly presence of my former self, pushing me to be better. It is a perfect, self-contained system of improvement, and I am its master. The feeling of out-sprinting my own ghost is a small, private victory that starts my every day. The park at this hour is a world of sensory details. The crunch of my running shoes on the gravel path is a steady, rhythmic beat. The cool, damp air smells of pine needles and wet earth. In the summer, I can hear the first tentative chirps of the waking birds. In the winter, the only sound is my own breathing, a white cloud in the frigid air. It is a world that feels ancient and wild, yet completely safe, because it is so empty. Have never felt afraid on these runs. I am strong, I am fast, and I know the terrain intimately. I carry a small, powerful flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp, clear path through the darkness ahead. The solitude is not a vulnerability, it is a strength. It allows for a level of focus that is impossible in the noisy, distracting world of the day. Here, in the pre-dawn gloom, I am the only thing that matters. My pace, my breath, my heartbeat. This routine has been a constant in my life for years. It has seen me through job changes, relationships ending, and all the small and large anxieties of modern life. It is my therapy, my meditation, my proof that I can rely on myself. The discipline it requires has bled into every other aspect of my life, making me more focused, more resilient. My pre-dawn run is not just exercise, it is the very core of my identity. The ghost on my screen is a perfect motivator because it is incorporeal. It is not a real person with their own moods and abilities. It is just data, a blue line moving across a map. It cannot judge me. It cannot mock me if I am too slow. It is simply a benchmark, a shadow of my own potential that I am constantly chasing. It is a race against myself, the purest form of competition I can imagine. And so, my world was a perfect controlled loop. Wake, run, race the ghost of yesterday, work, sleep. It was a life of discipline and data, of solitary strength and predictable outcomes. I was the master of my own small universe, the queen of my empty park. I was blissfully unaware that a new, unwanted runner was about to join my race, a second ghost that would corrupt my data and turn my sanctuary into a hunting ground. The feeling of finishing a run just as the first gray light of dawn begins to touch the horizon is a special kind of magic. It feels as though I have run through the entire night and have emerged on the other side, reborn. The world is still quiet, still asleep. But it is a different kind of quiet now. It is a silence filled with the promise of the coming day. I always finish my run at the same scenic overlook, watching the sky slowly transform from black to a deep bruised purple. My cool-down routine is as much a part of the ritual as the run itself. The slow walk back to my car, the stretching of my tired muscles, the feeling of my heart rate slowly returning to normal. It is a time of quiet reflection. I review the data from my run on my phone, analyzing my split times, my pace, my heart rate zones. I see the little blue avatar of my ghost pacer just a few seconds behind me on the map. It is a satisfying, tangible measure of my own progress. The drive home is always peaceful. The streets are just beginning to stir with the first wave of early commuters. I feel like I have a secret that they don't share. I have already accomplished something difficult, have already pushed my body and my mind to their limits, while they are still wiping the sleep from their eyes. This feeling of quiet superiority, however illusory, is a small private reward for my discipline. I feel strong, capable, and ready for whatever the day might bring. My apartment is a sanctuary of a different kind. It is a place of rest, of recovery. I have my post-run routine down to a science. A long, hot shower, a protein shake, a few minutes of quiet meditation before I have to get ready for my day job as an architect. My life is a series of these well-ordered, efficient systems, each one designed to maximize my performance, both physically and professionally. I thrive on this structure. I have never felt the need for a real-life running partner. The solitude is the point. It is a time for me to be completely inside my own head, to work through my thoughts, to listen to the rhythm of my own body. The idea of having to make small talk, to adjust my pace to someone else's, is anathema to me. The ghost pacer on my app is the perfect partner. It is silent, it is consistent, and it is me. The app's social features are something I have always ignored. I know you can follow other runners, share your routes, and compete on leaderboards, but I have always kept my profile private. My running is for me alone. It is not a performance for others. The data is for my own analysis, not for public consumption. My relationship with the app is a private one, a conversation between my present self and my past self. This deep, fundamental belief in my own privacy and control was the foundation upon which my entire routine was built. The park was empty. My profile was private. My ghost was my own. There were no outside variables, no unpredictable human elements to disrupt my perfect system. It was a closed loop, a world of one that I had carefully and deliberately constructed for myself. And so, my life continued in this peaceful, orderly fashion. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months. Every morning began with the same pre-dawn ritual, the same chase, the same quiet victory over my own shadow. The path through the park was as familiar to me as the lines on my own hand. There were no surprises in my world, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I was safe in the cocoon of my own discipline. I was blissfully unaware that a system designed to be a closed loop can always be breached from the outside. I believed my data was private, that my ghost was mine alone. I never considered that a bug, a glitch, or a more sinister, deliberate action could introduce a new, unknown variable into my carefully controlled experiment. I had created a world with only one ghost, but the system had other ideas. My sanctuary was about to be invaded in the most modern, insidious way imaginable. The tool I used for self-improvement, for control, for peace, was about to be turned into a weapon against me. A new runner was about to join my solitary race. A second ghost was about to appear on my screen, a silent gray avatar that would not be me, and it would not be a friend. The race was about to become a hunt. The morning it began was a perfect running morning. The air was cool and crisp, with just a hint of moisture that felt good to breathe in. I felt strong, my legs loose and ready. I set a new goal for myself in the Stride Strong app: to shave 10 seconds off my previous best time for the 5-mile loop. My blue ghost pacer appeared on the map, a familiar, silent challenger. The race was on, and I was determined to win. The run was glorious. I found my rhythm early, my breathing and my footfalls falling into a steady, powerful cadence. The pre-dawn woods were silent and still, the beam of my headlamp cutting a clean white path through the darkness. It was just me and the ghost of my former self, a silent dance through the sleeping park. I felt powerful, alive, and completely, utterly alone in the best possible way. This was my world, my sanctuary, and I was its master. I pushed hard on the final mile, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming in protest. I could see on my phone screen that I was just a few feet ahead of my blue ghost pacer. It was going to be close. I dug deep, channeling that last reserve of energy, and sprinted the final 100 yards to the scenic overlook that marked my finish line. I stopped, gasping for air, my hands on my knees, a triumphant smile on my face. I had beaten my best time by 3 seconds. After a few minutes of catching my breath and stretching, I began my usual cool-down walk back to the car. I pulled up the final stats on the app, my usual post-run ritual. The numbers were good. New, personal best. Excellent heart rate recovery. It was the kind of hard data that validated the hard work, the kind of clean, unambiguous success that I craved. I swiped over to the GPS map screen to review my route, to see where I had gained time on my ghost, and that's when I saw it. The map was crowded. There were 3 avatars on the screen. There was my own avatar, a small blue dot at the finish line. There was the translucent blue ghost of my previous run, just a few yards behind me. And then there was a third avatar. It was a generic gray figure, the kind the app used for other users on the social feed. It was standing about 100 yards behind my ghost, motionless on the path. My first reaction was simple confusion. I frowned at the screen. That was a bug. It had to be. The app must have glitched and pulled in the data from another user who had been in the park at the same time. It was sloppy programming, a data leak between users. But it was a plausible explanation. I had always kept my own profile private, but perhaps the app's default setting was to show nearby runners, and I had just never noticed it before. I zoomed in on the gray avatar. It had no username attached to it, just the default guest runner tag. It had no profile picture, no stats, nothing. It was a blank slate, a digital ghost of a different kind, a strange anomaly, but nothing more. I was more annoyed at the app's shoddy privacy features than I was concerned. It had cluttered my pristine data set with a piece of useless external noise. I tried to delete the guest runner from my map, but there was no option to do so. It was just there, a silent, gray presence attached to my victorious run. I sighed in frustration. I would have to go into the app's settings later and make sure every possible social feature was turned off. I wanted my solitude back, both on the trail and in my post-run data analysis. My race was against myself, and I didn't want any uninvited participants. I put the phone away and tried to put the incident out of my mind. It was a simple technical issue, a common annoyance in a world so dependent on imperfect software. It didn't mean anything. It was just a random confluence of signals, a moment where my digital world had briefly, and incorrectly, overlapped with someone else's. I would fix the settings, and it would not happen again. I was sure of it. But as I drove home, the image of the gray avatar lingered in my mind. It had been so still, so perfectly placed on the path behind me and my ghost. It felt less like another runner and more like a spectator. A silent, anonymous observer who had been watching my private race against myself. The thought was a small, cold stone that had been dropped into the calm pool of my morning, and I couldn't quite shake the ripples it was causing. When I got home, I did a deep dive into the Stride Strong app's settings. Just as I suspected, a recent update had opted me into a new Community Features setting by default. It was designed to show other app users who were running on the same public trails, a feature I found appalling from a privacy standpoint. I quickly found the toggle and switched everything to its most private, most offline setting. My data was now, once again, mine alone. The problem was solved. The relief was immediate and total. There was a simple, logical explanation for the gray avatar. It wasn't a sinister observer, it was just a poorly implemented feature. It was a classic case of a tech company prioritizing engagement over user privacy. I felt a surge of smug satisfaction. I had identified the problem, understood its cause, and implemented a solution. The world was once again an orderly, predictable place. The anomaly was explained and eliminated. The rest of my week was busy with work. A new project, a complex public library design, was consuming all my mental energy. The long hours and intricate details were a welcome distraction. The memory of the gray ghost faded into the background, becoming just another minor annoyance in a world full of them. It was a solved problem, a closed case, and my mind, now presented with new data to analyze, moved on without a second thought. I barely thought about my runs for the next few days, my focus entirely on architectural plans and client meetings. My pre-dawn ritual continued, but my mind was elsewhere, mulling over design challenges and structural engineering problems. The runs were still a physical release, but my mental energy was directed at my work. The strange digital ghost had been completely forgotten, relegated to the junk file of my memory. By the time the next week rolled around, my brief period of unease was a distant memory. I was back in my rhythm, my world stable and secure. As I prepared for my Tuesday morning run, my only thoughts were of my pace, my time, and the satisfying feeling of pushing my own limits. I felt no dread, no apprehension. The sanctuary of the park was waiting for me, silent and empty, just the way I liked it. I started the run feeling strong. The Stride Strong app, dutifully tracking my progress against my own blue ghost pacer. The air was cool, the path was clear, and my body felt powerful. This was my element. This was where I was in complete control. The world was reduced to the rhythm of my own breathing, the pound of my feet on the trail, and the quiet, personal challenge of beating the person I was yesterday. The run was a good one, though not a personal best. I finished feeling tired, but satisfied, the pleasant ache in my muscles a testament to a hard effort. I did my cool-down stretches at the scenic overlook, watching the sky begin to lighten, feeling that familiar sense of peace and accomplishment. I had started my day with a victory, a successful defense of my own physical and mental discipline. As I walked back to my car, I pulled out my phone to check my stats, a force of habit. I swiped over to the map view, expecting to see the clean, simple representation of my run. My blue avatar at the finish line, my blue ghost just a few paces behind. It was the data I expected, the data I had earned. It was the satisfying, final page of my morning story. But the map was wrong again. The screen showed the same impossible geography as the week before. There was my blue avatar. There was my blue ghost pacer. And there, about 80 yards behind this time, was the blank gray avatar of the guest runner. It was standing motionless on the path, a silent, impossible spectator who had once again watched my private race. The glitch had not been fixed. My blood ran cold. My carefully constructed explanation of a privacy setting, of a software bug, evaporated in an instant. I had set my profile to private. I had disabled every community feature. No one else's data should be appearing on my map. And yet, here it was. The same gray ghost, in the same impossible way. This was not a bug. A bug is random. A bug is inconsistent. This was happening again. This was a pattern. I stared at the screen of my phone, the cheerful colors of the app's interface a mocking contrast to the cold dread that was flooding my system. It was back. The gray ghost. My logical explanation, my comforting theory of a simple privacy setting, was a lie. This was something else. This was a persistent, recurring anomaly, a deliberate intrusion into my closed private world. My sanctuary had been breached again, and this time, I had no explanation at all. That day, the fear came home with me. It was no longer a fleeting sense of unease that I could dismiss. It was a concrete fact, a piece of data I could not ignore. A gray avatar was appearing on my private run map, and I had no idea why. I spent the day trying to work, but my mind was elsewhere. I was replaying the run, re-examining the map, trying to find a pattern, a clue, anything that could explain it. The mystery had become an obsession. I thought about contacting the app's tech support, but what would I say? There's a gray avatar on my map that won't go away. They would tell me to reinstall the app, to check my settings, to do all the things I had already done. They would treat it as a minor bug, a corrupted file. They would not understand the creeping psychological horror of it, the feeling of being watched by a silent digital specter. The next morning, as I prepared for my run, the mood was entirely different. There was no peaceful anticipation, no focus on beating my own best time. My goal was not to race my own ghost, it was to observe the new one. I strapped the phone to my arm not as a training tool, but as a piece of surveillance equipment. I was going into the park not as a runner, but as an investigator, and the thought filled me with a heavy, cold dread. My run was a tense, paranoid affair. I barely noticed my own pace or my breathing. My eyes were constantly flicking down to the screen of my phone, watching the map, waiting. For the first 4 miles, it was just me and my own blue pacer. A small, desperate part of me began to hope that it had been a 2-time fluke, that it wouldn't appear today. But I knew it was a foolish hope. It was waiting. And then, on the final mile, it appeared. The gray avatar simply materialized on the path behind me, just as before. But as I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, I noticed something new. It was closer this time. The first time, it had been 100 yards back. The second time, perhaps 80. Now, as I measured the distance on the map with my eye, it felt like it was only 50 or 60 yards behind me. It was closing the distance. This new data point was the most terrifying discovery yet. A persistent glitch is one thing, a glitch that changes, that evolves, that behaves with a terrifying predatory logic, is another thing entirely. This was not a random bug. The distance was shrinking. It was a deliberate, incremental, and patient approach. It was the calculated movement of a hunter, slowly, methodically closing the gap on its prey. I finished my run, my mind a maelstrom of fear. The satisfaction of the physical exertion was gone, replaced by the chilling, mathematical certainty that I was being stalked. This was a game of inches and feet, of yards being slowly, systematically erased. He, and I was certain now that it was a he, was not just watching me. He was approaching me, one digital footstep at a time, day by day. Back at home I started a new kind of log, not of my running times, but of the ghost. I took a screenshot of the run map and saved it, labeling it with the date. I compared it to the screenshot from the week before. The difference was undeniable. The gray avatar had moved closer. I was now applying my analytical, data-driven mind to the problem, and the data was telling me a story of a slow, relentless, and terrifying pursuit. My beautiful, solitary ritual was now a source of profound terror. The park was no longer my sanctuary. My phone was no longer my tool. They had been co-opted by him, turned into instruments of my own psychological torment. Every morning, I now had a choice: to stay home and let the fear win, or to go out and run, to willingly participate in his horrifying game of inches, and to see just how much closer he would get this time. For the next week, I continued to run. I told myself it was an act of defiance, a refusal to let him win. But I knew on some level that it was a compulsion. I had to collect the data. I had to know. Each morning, I would go out into the pre-dawn darkness, and each morning, the gray ghost would appear on my screen, a little closer than the day before. 50 yards, then 40, then 30. My logbook was becoming a terrifying graph of his approach. The joy of running was completely gone, replaced by a grim, obsessive need to monitor the screen. My own performance, my own ghost, became irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the distance between my blue avatar and the encroaching gray one. I was no longer racing against myself. I was running from him, a frantic digital flight from a predator who was gaining on me with a slow, mathematical, and inescapable certainty. I started to feel a strange, disassociating sense of reality. The run itself, the physical act of my body moving through the park, felt less real than the drama unfolding on the small screen strapped to my arm. The map was the real world. The avatars were the real people. My own pounding heart and burning lungs were just a secondary supporting system for the tiny blue dot that was fleeing the gray one. My rational mind fought a desperate losing battle against the mounting evidence. It's a progressive bug, I would tell myself. A caching error that duplicates the Ghost Pacer file and corrupts its starting position by a few yards each day. I would invent complex, convoluted technical explanations, anything to avoid the simpler, more terrifying truth that the app was tracking a real person who was getting closer to me every day. The fear was a constant metallic taste in my mouth. I became jumpy, irritable. The solitude of the park, once a source of peace, was now a source of profound vulnerability. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves was a potential sign of his physical presence. I started running with only one earbud in, a desperate attempt to stay attuned to the sounds of the real world while I monitored the horror of the digital one. The gray pacer was relentless. It never missed a day. Its pace was always a perfect mirror of my own, never faster, never slower. It just started a little closer each time. The patience of it was what terrified me the most. It was not a sprint. It was a marathon of intimidation, and he had an infinite supply of endurance. He was showing me that he could catch me whenever he wanted, but he was choosing not to. He was enjoying the chase. After 2 weeks of this daily, incremental approach, the gray avatar was now starting the final mile just 10 yards behind me on the map. The proximity was suffocating. I could no longer pretend it was a glitch. It was a presence, a digital specter breathing down my neck. The small screen of my phone had become the most terrifying place on Earth. A window into a chase that was happening in a dimension I couldn't see, but could feel with every fiber of my being. I knew I had to stop. I knew I had to delete the app, to throw my phone in a river, to stop running in that park. But I couldn't. The compulsion to see, to know, to document was too strong. I was a scientist in a lab with a monster, and I could not bring myself to abandon the experiment, even if I was the one in the cage. His game had become my obsession. The breaking point was near. The digital representation of the threat was about to become a physical one. He had closed the distance on the screen to a point where the separation was almost meaningless. He was right behind me in the digital world, a hair's breadth away. His proximity on the map was a promise, a guarantee, that he was about to make his presence known in the real world. The next morning, I went for my run with a sense of fated, final dread. The gray avatar appeared on the screen, just a few feet behind my blue one. They were practically running on top of each other. And as I ran through the silent, pre-dawn woods, my own breath a ragged cloud in the cold air, I heard it for the first time. A new sound, perfectly in sync with my own footfalls. The sound of a second pair of running shoes, crunching on the gravel path right behind me. The sound was so perfectly in sync with my own steps that for a moment, I thought it was just an echo. A strange auditory illusion created by the dense pre-dawn air in the surrounding woods. Crunch, 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 crunch. My feet on the gravel, and then an identical sound, a fraction of a second later, It was a perfect rhythmic mimicry of my own pace, but it wasn't an echo. An echo fades. This sound was crisp, clear, and consistent. It was the sound of another person. My blood ran cold. I kept running, my mind a frantic scramble of denial and terror. It's another runner, that's all. Another early riser who happens to have the same pace as me. But the park was always empty at this hour. I had never, in 3 years of running this path, encountered another soul. And the perfect, synchronized rhythm of the steps was not the sound of a coincidental meeting. It was the sound of deliberate, precise mimicry. I decided to test it. My heart hammering against my ribs, I slowed my pace just slightly. The footsteps behind me immediately adjusted, slowing to match my new, slower rhythm without missing a beat. The perfect synchronization remained. I sped up, my feet flying across the gravel. The footsteps behind me instantly matched my new, frantic pace. This was not a coincidence. This was a conscious, deliberate act. I was being followed. I stopped, abruptly. I froze in the middle of the path, my body tensed, my ears straining against the sudden, deafening silence. And the footsteps behind me stopped at the exact same instant. The silence was absolute. There was no sound of someone shuffling to a halt, no sound of breathing, no rustle of clothing. Just a profound, perfect, and terrifying silence. He had stopped when I stopped. He was mirroring my every move. With a courage I did not know I possessed, I slowly, deliberately, turned around. My headlamp cut a bright, trembling beam through the darkness, illuminating the path behind me. It was completely empty. The long, straight stretch of gravel was deserted. There were no trees close enough to the path for someone to hide behind. There was nowhere for a person to go. There was no one there. And yet, I had heard him. I stood there for a full minute, my light scanning the silent, empty path. My mind, reeling. Was I losing my mind? Had the paranoia from the app finally manifested as an auditory hallucination? Was I so terrified of the gray avatar on my screen that my brain had created a physical soundtrack for it? The possibility was almost as terrifying as the alternative. What was worse? Being hunted by a real person, or being hunted by my own, unraveling sanity? My heart pounding, I started running again. And as my own feet began to crunch on the gravel, the second set of footsteps began again, instantly, perfectly in sync with my own. He was still there. The invisible man. The phantom runner. He was right behind me, his presence announced only by the sound of his feet hitting the ground in perfect time with mine. I was being chased by a ghost I could hear but not see. The rest of the run was a pure, mindless flight of terror. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't care about my pace or my ghost pacer. The only data that mattered was the horrifying, real-time auditory data of the footsteps behind me. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life, my lungs on fire, my legs screaming in protest. But I could not outrun him. His pace was always my pace. His footsteps were always my shadow. When I finally burst out of the woods and into the relative safety of the park's parking lot, the footsteps behind me ceased. The moment my feet hit the asphalt, the sound of the gravel crunching behind me was gone. There was only the sound of my own ragged, desperate breathing. I spun around, my headlamp beam scanning the edge of the woods. There was nothing. Just the dark, silent trees. He would not or could not leave the path. I scrambled into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the ignition. I locked the doors and sped out of the parking lot, my eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his gaunt, hollow-eyed face staring back at me from the empty back seat. The drive home was a blur of terror. The sanctuary of the park had been violated. The digital threat had become a physical one, and I was completely, utterly terrified. Back in my apartment, with the door locked and the chain engaged, the terror did not subside. It had followed me home, a passenger in my own mind. I paced my small living room, my running clothes still damp with sweat, my body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. The silence of my apartment was no longer a comfort. It was just a different kind of emptiness, an absence of the horrifying sound that I now knew was real. My mind raced, trying to find a foothold in logic. An echo? Impossible. Another runner, who was deliberately, sadistically, mimicking my every move for miles. It seemed insane, but it was more plausible than the alternative. But how could they have stayed so perfectly hidden? How could they have stopped and started with such impossible, instantaneous precision? Every rational explanation I tried to construct seemed to crumble under the weight of the experience. After an hour of frantic pacing, I forced myself to look at my phone. I had to see the data. I had to see what the app had recorded during my terrifying flight. With a sense of profound dread, I opened the Stride Strong app and navigated to the summary of my last run. My heart pounded as I clicked on the map view, terrified of what I would find, of the final digital confirmation of my auditory nightmare. The map loaded onto the screen. My route was a jagged, frantic blue line. And the gray avatar, the ghost, Pacer, was there. But it was not behind me anymore. It was not 10 yards back, or 5, or 1. It was perfectly, completely merged with my own blue avatar. For the entire duration of the run, the two icons had moved as one, a single, overlapping entity. On the screen, we had been a single runner. I stared at the screen, at the two avatars fused into one. It was the final, undeniable proof. The app was not glitching. It was tracking. It had been tracking a real physical person. A person who had been so close to me that our GPS signals had become indistinguishable. He had not been behind me. He had been on top of me. A silent, invisible passenger on my own run. The implications of this were staggering. He was not just following me. He was mirroring me with a precision that was almost supernatural. He had matched my every step, my every change in pace, my every movement. He had been so close, so perfectly in sync, that the app, the tool I used to measure myself, could no longer tell the difference between me and him. We had become one data point. The violation was absolute. My body, my pace, my very rhythm. It had all been stolen, copied, and mimicked by this phantom. My most personal, solitary activity had been infiltrated by an unseen partner. The data on my screen, which I had once seen as a pure reflection of my own effort, was now corrupted, tainted by his presence. He had hacked my run. He had hacked my body. I threw the phone across the room, a strangled sob escaping my lips. It hit the wall with a dull thud and clattered to the floor. I couldn't look at it anymore. The app, my trusted companion, my tool of self-improvement, was now a window for him, a tracking device that was delivering my exact location to my tormentor. It was a Judas on my arm, betraying my every move. The first part of this nightmare was over. The subtle hints, the closing distance on the screen, it had all been a prelude to this, a direct, physical, and sensory confirmation of the threat. It was real. It was human. It was intelligent. And it could make itself invisible. My paranoia was no longer paranoia. It was a rational and correct assessment of my terrifying reality. I was being hunted. I huddled on my couch, wrapping a blanket around myself, but I couldn't get warm. The chill was deep inside me now. I was trapped. He knew my routine. He knew my park. And now he had proven that he could get so close to me that I could hear his footsteps, but I could not see his face. The game had escalated from a digital chase to a real-world horror, and I had no idea what his intentions were. For the first time in years, I did not run the next day. The thought of returning to that park, to that path, was unbearable. The phantom footsteps were still echoing in my ears. I stayed in my apartment, a prisoner of my own fear, my running, shoes sitting by the door like accusations. To not run felt like a failure, a surrender, but to go back felt like an act of madness. He had successfully, for the first time, broken my most sacred routine. The hunter had driven me from my own territory. My mind, desperate for a logical solution, turned to the app itself. The app was the nexus of this horror, the medium through which he was tracking and tormenting me. Perhaps the problem was still a technical one, a deeply embedded bug, or a piece of malware that had somehow infected my phone. It was a slim hope, but it was the only rational explanation I had left. I decided to perform a digital exorcism, a full cleansing of the technology. I uninstalled the Stride Strong app, deleting every file and clearing every cache associated with it. I then did a full factory reset of my phone, wiping it completely clean, a scorched earth approach to digital hygiene. It was a drastic, inconvenient measure, erasing years of photos and contacts that I hadn't backed up. But it felt necessary. I had to be sure that no trace of his digital ghost remained on my device. After the reset, I cautiously reinstalled a clean version of the app. My next step was to contact tech support. I composed a carefully worded email, omitting the more insane details like the phantom footsteps. I simply stated that my app was showing persistent, erroneous GPS data from another user on my private maps, and that I was concerned about a data breach. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. I needed an expert to tell me this was a known bug, a simple problem with a simple solution. The response I received 2 days later was a masterpiece of corporate non-assistance. It was a generic pre-written email explaining that GPS interference in wooded areas can sometimes cause signal reflection, leading to ghosting artifacts on the map. They suggested I make sure my phone's software was up to date and try running in a more open area. It was a complete, utter dismissal of my concerns. They had given my digital ghost a name: GPS reflection. I was on my own. The factory reset was my last technical hope, and the company that made the app was useless. The fear began to creep back in, the feeling of helpless isolation. But then, a new thought emerged, born of my lingering defiance. I had tried to fix the technology. What if I changed the environment instead? He knew my route, the 5-mile loop I had run 1,000 times. He was waiting for me there, so I would not go there. The park was large, with dozens of other trails I had never explored. I would create a new routine, a new path that he couldn't possibly know. I would break his pattern by creating a new one of my own. It was a strategic retreat, a way of changing the battlefield to a location of my choosing. It felt like a smart, proactive move, a way to regain control of the situation. I spent the next few days not running, but studying the park map. I planned a new 5-mile loop on the opposite side of the park, a series of winding, less-traveled trails through a denser part of the woods. It was a route he would have no reason to expect, no reason to be watching. I felt a flicker of my old confidence return. I was an architect, after all. I was designing a new system, a new pattern, to defeat him. The morning I decided to try my new route, I was filled with a nervous, anxious energy. This was a test of my new strategy. If I could run this new path and see nothing on the app, no gray avatar, then I would know I had succeeded. I would have proven that his surveillance was limited to my old routine. I would have found a way to become invisible to him again. I drove to a different entrance of the park, one I had never used before. The air was cold and still. As I started my run on the unfamiliar path, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. This was my move, my counterattack. I was not a victim anymore. I was an opponent, actively working to outsmart the person who was hunting, me. I was taking the power back, and I prayed that this time I would be running alone. The new path was disorienting. The woods here were thicker, the pre-dawn darkness more profound. I didn't have the muscle memory for this route. Every turn was a surprise, every incline a new challenge. But the unfamiliarity was a weapon. He could not predict my movements here. I was a stranger in my own park, and that, I hoped, made me invisible to him. I ran with my phone in my hand, my thumb constantly refreshing the map screen. For the first mile, my heart pounded with anxiety. I kept checking the screen, expecting the gray avatar to materialize at any moment. But the map remained clean. It was just my blue dot, moving through the dark digital woods. The only ghost chasing me was my own. With each passing minute, a small piece of my confidence returned. Maybe this was it. Maybe the solution was as simple as taking a different turn. I finished the entire 5-mile loop, and the gray avatar never appeared. When I reached my car, I stood there for a long time, just staring at the completed map on my phone. It was a beautiful, simple, and clean image. A single blue line, a single blue avatar at the end. It was the way it was supposed to be. The relief was so profound, so overwhelming that my legs felt weak. I had done it. I had lost him. I ran the new route for the rest of the week, and the result was the same every single morning. No gray ghost. No phantom footsteps. No digital specter breathing down my neck. The app behaved exactly as it was supposed to. My runs became peaceful again, my time my own. The fear that had been my constant companion began to recede, replaced by a growing, triumphant sense of security. I had found his weakness. He was a creature of routine, and my routine was no longer predictable. My victory felt even sweeter than my previous personal bests. I had not just beaten a time. I had beaten a person. I had outthought my tormentor. I had analyzed his methods, identified his limitations, and implemented a successful counter-strategy. The feeling was intoxicating. I had been the victim, the hunted, but I had used my own intelligence to turn the tables. I was in control of the game again. The memory of the fear began to feel distant, almost foolish. I had allowed myself to be terrorized by what was, in essence, a digital prankster with a predictable pattern. He had found a crack in my routine and had exploited it. But now that I had sealed that crack, he was powerless. He was just a man who had gotten his kicks from a strange, remote form of harassment. And now that it was no longer working, he had surely moved on. I began to love my new route. It was more challenging, more beautiful than my old one. I felt like I had not only escaped a threat, but had also discovered a better version of my own ritual. My confidence was fully restored. I was no longer the frightened, paranoid woman who was afraid of her own phone. I was Alex, the disciplined runner, the master of my own solitude, the woman who had outsmarted a ghost. This period of peace was a necessary illusion. It was a deep, calming breath before the next, more terrifying plunge. My victory was based on the flawed assumption that my enemy was predictable, that his obsession was tied to a specific path. I believed I had outsmarted him, but in reality, I had only given him new data to analyze. I had shown him that I was a player who could change her strategy. He had let me have my week of peace. He had let me build my confidence back up, let me settle into my new, safe routine. He had been watching, learning, and adapting. He had seen my new path, my new schedule, and he was about to demonstrate that my attempts to be unpredictable were meaningless. He wasn't just watching my old route. He had been watching me, and his next move would be designed to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that there was no path I could run, no corner of the park I could hide in, where he could not find me. My brief, triumphant respite was over, and the game was about to become far more personal and far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. My confidence was a fragile, beautiful thing, and it lasted for exactly 8 days. On the 9th day, a Thursday, I woke up feeling strong, ready to tackle my new, more challenging route. The fear had receded so completely that it felt like a distant memory from another person's life. I was no longer the haunted woman, but the victorious one. I had reclaimed my park, my routine, and my peace. I stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness without a single shred of apprehension. I started my run, my phone strapped to my arm, the Stride Strong app fired up and ready to track my progress. I felt a sense of ownership over this new path. It was mine, a route I had designed myself, a secret corner of the park that was free from the ghosts of the past. The air was cool and still, and the only sounds were my own steady breathing and the crunch of my feet on the trail. It was perfect. I was about 2 miles in, feeling good, my pace strong, when my phone buzzed against my arm. It was a notification from the Stride Strong app. I glanced down at the screen, expecting to see a milestone alert. You've completed mile 2. But it was not a milestone alert. It was a social notification, the kind I had disabled weeks ago. The banner at the top of my screen read, "A new runner is now following you." My heart stopped. A cold, familiar dread washed over me, instantly extinguishing the warmth of my physical exertion. A follower. But my profile was set to private. No, one should be able to follow me. No one should even be able to find me. I slowed to a jog, my eyes fixed on the screen, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. It had to be a mistake. A system-wide bug. It had to be. With a trembling finger, I tapped on the notification. It took me to a user profile page, the kind I had never seen before because I had never engaged with the social side of the app. The profile was almost completely blank. The profile picture was the default gray, genderless avatar. The statistics, total miles, average pace, number of runs were all 0, but there, at the top of the page, was a username. It read simply, Pacer. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Pacer. It was him. He had found me. He had not only bypassed my private settings, but he had created a profile, had given himself a name, and had now officially, in the language of the app, begun to follow me. This was a horrifying escalation. He was no longer a silent, anonymous glitch. He was now a registered user in my digital world, a named entity. My eyes scanned the rest of the blank profile, searching for any other information. And then I saw the activity log at the bottom of the page. It showed a long list of recent actions. Pacer liked your run from June 5th. Pacer liked your run from June 3rd. Pacer liked your run from May 28th. He had gone back through my entire run history, every single log I had ever created, and he had liked them all. The violation was profound. My private history, my log of personal achievements, had been turned into his playground. He had walked through the digital museum of my life, leaving his fingerprints on every exhibit. Each like was a small digital touch, a way of telling me that he had seen it all, that he knew my entire history, every pace, every mile I had ever run in this park. He was not just following my present, he was consuming my past. I stumbled to a stop in the middle of the dark, silent trail. I looked at the GPS map on my phone, and there it was. Just behind my own blue avatar on this new, supposedly secret path, the gray ghost had reappeared. It was back. A silent, menacing presence that had found me with impossible ease. My clever new route, my brilliant strategy, had been completely and utterly useless. He had just been waiting. He had been waiting for me to get comfortable, to feel safe before making this move. He had let me have my small victory. This was not just a continuation of the game. It was a punishment for my defiance. It was a clear, brutal message. There is nowhere you can run where I will not find you. There is no new path you can create that I will not follow. I own this park, and I own you. I stood there on the dark trail, my own triumphant confidence, from minutes before now a bitter, foolish memory. He had not been outsmarted. He had been toying with me, giving me just enough rope to hang myself with. My new path was not a secret. It was just a new board for the same horrifying game. I looked at the gray avatar on my screen, so close to my own, and I felt a sense of utter, complete defeat. I turned and walked back to my car, my run unfinished. The drive home was a silent, grim affair. I had been so proud of my proactive, logical solutions. But my logic was a child's understanding of a game being played by a grandmaster. He was not just reacting to me, he was anticipating me. He knew I would change my route. He had probably known it from the moment I first saw the glove. And he had waited, patiently, for me to settle into a new routine before revealing that he had been there all along. Back in my apartment, I sat on my couch and stared at his blank profile on my phone. Pacer. The name was so generic, yet so specific. It was a perfect, taunting description of his role in my life. He was setting my pace, not on the trail, but in this dance of terror. He was the one who decided when to get closer, when to reveal himself, when to escalate. The name was a declaration of his complete control over our relationship. The list of likes on my old runs was a profound violation. It was a digital form of trespassing. He had walked through the private history of my achievements and had left his mark everywhere, a quiet, possessive claim on my past. Each like was a whisper from the darkness, a reminder that he had seen everything, that every moment of solitary triumph I had ever felt in that park had been secretly shared with him. Felt a surge of helpless anger. I tried to block his profile, but the app had no such function for followers. I could report him, but for what? This user liked my runs, and it's scaring me? The absurdity of my situation was a prison in itself. He had found a way to harass me using the very mechanics of the app, twisting a feature designed for encouragement into a tool of intimidation. He was untouchable. The nature of the threat had changed fundamentally. It was no longer a mysterious, passive observation. It was now an active, acknowledged pursuit by a named, albeit anonymous entity. He had a name now, Pacer. And by following me, he had created a direct digital link between us. We were connected now, in this strange, terrifying, one-sided social network of the hunted and the hunter. My sanctuary was gone. My routine was a trap. My history was compromised. And now, my very identity within the app I had used for years had been tethered to his. I felt a sense of being digitally contaminated, as if his presence were a virus that was slowly corrupting every part of my life, both real and virtual. He was not just following me on a map. He was following me through my life. The world now felt like it was divided into two parts, the time before I knew his name and the time after. Before, the threat was a vague, shadowy thing. Now, it had a name, Pacer, and giving him a name, even one he had chosen for himself, gave him a horrifying new reality. He was no longer just a glitch or a phantom. He was a person who was actively, intelligently, and patiently orchestrating my terror. I knew that I had lost this round completely. My attempt to fight back had not only failed, it had provoked a more severe, more personal attack. He had seen my pathetic defenses, and he had effortlessly bypassed them, not with a show of force, but with a few simple clicks on an app. He was showing me that my control was an illusion, and that he could get to me whenever and however he wanted. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the gray avatar on the screen. It was closer than ever before, a silent, digital predator. But now, it had a name, Pacer. And I knew, with a certainty that left no room for hope, that the footsteps I had heard on the path were his. And I knew that it was only a matter of time before he closed the final few yards and I would be forced to see his face. The Pacer profile was a constant, malevolent presence in my life. I found myself obsessively checking the app, not to log my own runs, but to see his profile. It never changed. It was always there. A blank, gray slate following me. A silent testament to my own private horror. He had successfully invaded the one digital space that had been entirely mine, and now his ghost haunted every screen, every map, every piece of data. My digital life had been colonized. I stopped running for 3 days. The fear was too great, the sense of futility too profound. What was the point? He would be there, a silent gray avatar on my screen, a perfect set of phantom footsteps behind, me on the trail. My ritual, once a source of strength and solitude, was now a stage for his performance, and I refused to participate. But the lack of running, the disruption of my core routine, only made my anxiety worse. I felt trapped, both in my home and out of it. I knew I couldn't handle this alone anymore. The silence was becoming unbearable, my own thoughts a-swirling, vortex of fear and paranoia. I needed to tell someone. I needed to speak the words aloud, to take the horror out of my own head and put it into the world, to see if it sounded as insane to someone else as it did to me. I decided to confide in my oldest friend, a woman named Chloe, who had known me since we were kids. We met for coffee at a small cafe, the bright, cheerful atmosphere a jarring contrast to the darkness I was carrying inside me. I tried to explain everything, my voice low and urgent, my hands wrapped around my warm mug for comfort. I told her about the ghost pacer, the closing distance, the phantom footsteps that so perfectly mimicked my own. I showed her his blank profile. On my phone, the name Pacer, the long, obsessive list of likes on my old runs. Chloe listened patiently, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. She knew me. She knew I was not prone to exaggeration or drama, but the story I was telling her was so strange, so specific, that I could see her struggling to find a logical framework for it. She was trying to fit my square peg of terror into the round hole of her normal, rational world, and it wasn't working. "Alex," she said, her voice soft and careful after I had finished. "That is incredibly creepy. I get why you're freaked out. It's some kind of weirdo online, some troll who has figured out how to glitch the app to mess with people." She was trying to categorize him, to put him in a box she could understand. A troll. It was a mundane, modern explanation for a horror that felt anything but mundane. "But the footsteps, Chloe," I insisted, leaning forward. "I heard him. He was right behind me. When I stopped, he stopped." She bit her lip, a look of pity in her eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "You're out there at 5 a.m. It's dark. It's isolated. The acoustics in the woods can be strange. Couldn't it have just been an echo? Or another runner you just didn't see?" Her words were a gentle, loving sledgehammer to my reality. She was offering me rational explanations, escape hatches from my own fear. But in doing so, she was also telling me that she didn't believe me. Not really. She believed I was scared, but she didn't believe in the source of my fear. She thought I was a victim of circumstance and my own overactive imagination, not the target of an intelligent, relentless stalker. I tried to explain the impossibility of it, the perfect synchronization, the way the sound vanished on the asphalt. But the more I tried to explain, the more frantic and less credible I sounded. I could see the shift in her expression, from concern about a creepy troll to concern about me, about my mental state. My attempt to find an ally was turning me into a patient, a case study in stress and paranoia. The conversation ended with her suggesting I take a break from running in the park for a while. "Run on a treadmill at the gym," she suggested, "or just take some time off. You're clearly stressed out and this whole thing is feeding into it." She was trying to help, to offer a practical solution, but her solution was based on a flawed premise that the problem was the park, the routine. She didn't understand that the problem was him, and he was not confined to a single location. I left the coffee shop feeling hollowed out. The conversation had been a complete failure. I had reached out for a lifeline and had been handed an anchor of doubt instead. Chloe's concern for my well-being was, in its own way, a deeper wound than outright mockery would have been. She believed I was suffering, but she was treating the symptom, not the cause. The monster was real, and my best friend had just told me I was imagining it. My isolation was no longer just a feeling. It was a confirmed fact. I walked home through the bustling city streets, feeling like a ghost. I was surrounded by people, yet I had never felt so completely alone. Each person was living in a normal, rational world, while I was living in a private, tailor-made horror story. The barrier between my reality and theirs was invisible, but it was as solid as a brick wall. I couldn't pull anyone else into my world, and I couldn't escape back into theirs. That evening, I considered calling the police. I actually picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the numbers. But what would I say? I played the conversation out in my head. Hello? I'd like to report a man. Well, I haven't seen him, but his avatar on my running app is following me, and sometimes I hear footsteps. It was absurd. It was the rambling of a paranoid lunatic. They would tell me it was a civil matter, or a prank, or that I should simply delete the app. They would be even more dismissive than Chloe had been. There was no crime. That was the terrible genius of his harassment. Liking a public run on a fitness app is not a crime. A potential GPS glitch is not a crime. The sound of footsteps with no one there is not a crime. Every single action he had taken was deniable, explainable, and existed in a legal gray area. He had constructed his campaign of terror with the precision of a lawyer, ensuring he was always just on the right side of the law. And so, I was trapped. I had no recourse. The systems designed to protect people, friends, family, the authorities, were all useless to me because my problem was too strange, too specific, too unbelievable. My tormentor had found a perfect loophole in the fabric of society, a way to psychologically torture someone with complete and utter impunity. He was a ghost in the machine, and no one hunts ghosts. I felt a profound sense of hopelessness settle over me. He had successfully isolated me. He had discredited my story before I even had a chance to tell it. He had turned my own friends against my perception of reality. It was just me and him now, the pacer and the paced, locked in a silent battle that no one else could see. And he was winning. He was winning because he had made the world his accomplice. The next few days were a blur of quiet, resigned terror. I stopped running. I couldn't face the park. I couldn't face the app. I couldn't face the inevitable appearance of the gray avatar and the sound of the phantom footsteps. My routine, my sanctuary, my entire identity as a runner. He had taken it all from me without ever laying a hand on me. He had won by simply making me too afraid to play the game. But the silence was not a victory. It was a different kind of torment. My body, so accustomed to the daily exertion, felt sluggish and weak. My mind, with no physical outlet for its anxiety, began to turn on itself. Every quiet moment was filled with the thought of him. Was he wondering where I was? Was he angry that I had stopped running? Or was he just patiently waiting, knowing that sooner or later, my discipline, my need to run, would overcome my fear? He was right. After 4 days of sedentary misery, I knew I couldn't go on like this. I had to run. It was a part of who I was, and to give it up was to let him kill a part of me. I decided I would go back. I would face the footsteps, the avatar, the fear. I would not let him take my park from me. It was a foolish decision, a decision born of desperation, but it was the only one I felt I could make. I didn't know it then, but my return was exactly what he had been waiting for. He had broken my routine, isolated me from my support systems, and had pushed me to my absolute limit. And now that I was at my most vulnerable, my most desperate, he was ready for his final move of the second act. He was about to show me that his surveillance was not limited to the park. He was about to follow me all the way home. My return to the park was not triumphant. It was a surrender. I arrived before dawn, the familiar chill in the air doing nothing to numb the dread that coated my tongue. I felt like a lamb returning to a slaughterhouse, my own addiction to the rhythm and release of running leading me back to the source of my terror. I strapped my phone to my arm, the device feeling less like a tool and more like a tracking collar, and I started to run. For the first mile, there was only the sound of my own footsteps, my own ragged breathing. A small, foolish part of me hoped that my 4-day absence had been enough, that he had gotten bored, that he had moved on to a new target. But I knew it was a lie. He was patient. He was waiting. And I knew, with a sick certainty, that he would choose his moment to reappear, to punish me for my brief truancy. The footsteps began on the 2nd mile, on a long, dark stretch of trail, surrounded by dense woods. They were not faint this time. They were loud, clear, and closer than ever before. Crunch, 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 crunch. A perfect predatory echo of my own panicked pace. On the screen of my phone, the gray avatar materialized, not yards behind me, but directly on top of my own blue dot. We were one. He was with me. The fear was so intense, so immediate, that it was almost a pure, clean form of energy. There was no room for thought, no room for strategy. My body took over, my instincts screaming a single, simple command: flee. I abandoned my route, my planned 5-mile loop, and I just ran. I sprinted through the dark woods, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly, my only goal to get back to the parking lot, to my car, to a locked metal box on wheels. The footsteps stayed, with me, a constant, terrifying companion. They were so close now that I could almost feel the vibration of them through the ground, could almost feel the breath of the phantom runner on the back of my neck. I risked a single, terrified glance over my shoulder, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty path winding back into the blackness of the woods. He was a ghost I could hear and feel, but never see. The run was no longer a race against a clock or a past self. It was a desperate, primal flight from a predator. I pushed my body harder than I ever had, my muscles screaming, my lungs burning, fueled by a pure, unadulterated terror. But I could not shake him. His footsteps were my shadow, a sound that was perfectly, impossibly tethered to my own. He was a part of me now, a horrifying parasite on my own movement. When I finally burst out of the tree line and into the dimly lit parking lot, the sound of his footsteps vanished the instant my own feet hit the asphalt. It was the same as before. He was bound to the trail, to the park. It was his hunting ground, and he would not, or could not, leave it. This small fact was the only thing that kept me from collapsing into a sobbing heap on the ground. There was a boundary. I scrambled into my car, my hands shaking so violently that it took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. I peeled out of the parking lot, my tires squealing in protest, and I did not look back. The drive home was a blur. I blasted the radio, the loud, obnoxious pop music, a desperate attempt to drown out the memory of the footsteps, the silence of my own terrified mind. Back in my apartment, I leaned against my locked door, gasping for air. My body, trembling with exhaustion and residual fear, I had escaped. I had made it back to my sanctuary. The physical ordeal was over. For a few hours, I allowed myself to believe that was the end of it. I had returned to his territory. I had survived his chase. And I had made it home. I was safe. Now, But the real horror of that day was not in the park. It was not in the phantom footsteps that had chased me through the woods. The real horror was still waiting for me, silently, on my phone. It was in the data of the run I had just completed. It was a single, gray line on a map, a line that would prove that his territory was not the park. His territory was wherever I was. Later that day, after a long, hot shower had washed away the sweat, but not the fear, I finally forced myself to look at my phone. I had to see the data. I had to see what the app had recorded during my frantic escape. My hands were steady now, my mind wrapped in a strange, detached calm, the kind that comes after the adrenaline has burned away, leaving only a hollow, echoing exhaustion. I opened the app and navigated to my last run. The stats were a testament to my terror. A heart rate that had redlined for 10 minutes straight, a pace that was unsustainable, a distance that was less than half of my usual loop. It was the data of a body in pure, panicked flight. I swiped over to the map. My own route was a jagged blue line, veering off the familiar path and making a desperate beeline for the parking lot exit. It stopped, as it should, where my car was parked. But there was another line on the map. The gray line. The Pacer's line. It was perfectly superimposed on top of my own for the entire duration of my run. A silent, digital twin to my frantic escape. It mirrored my every panicked turn, my every desperate sprint. And then, my heart stopped. At the edge of the parking lot, where my own blue line came to a definitive end, the gray line did not. It continued. The thin, gray line of the Pacer left the boundaries of the park. It moved past the parking lot exit and onto the street. My breath hitched in my throat as I zoomed out on the map, my fingers trembling. The line snaked through the digital streets of the city, a ghostly thread unwinding through the world. It was following the exact route of my drive home. Every turn, every street, every stoplight. I watched, mesmerized with a horror so profound, it felt like I was outside my own body. The gray line continued its journey, a perfect, impossible recreation of my own path. It moved through my neighborhood, past the familiar landmarks of my daily life. The grocery store, the coffee shop, the library. It was a violation of my entire world, not just my pre-dawn ritual. He had not just followed me in the park. He had followed me home. The gray line finally came to a stop. It did not fade away or disappear. It just ended. A small gray avatar pulsing softly on the map. It was positioned directly on top of the small blue dot that indicated my own current location. It was on my apartment building. It was on my home. He knew where I lived. The boundary I thought existed, the line between the park and my life, was a fiction. The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. The entity was not bound to the park. The phantom footsteps were not a localized phenomenon. The park had just been his training ground, his observation deck. He had used it to learn my rhythms, my pace, my limits, and now that he had all the data he needed, he had followed me back to my den, to my nest, to the one place in the world I had believed I was truly safe. The despair was total. It was a physical weight, a crushing black wave that obliterated every last shred of hope. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was just another point on his map. He knew my running route, and now he knew my address. He had my photo. He had my data. He had my fear. He had every piece of me. The surveillance was complete and absolute. I was living in a cage of my own making, a cage of data and routine, and he had found the key. He had proven, beyond any doubt, that there was nowhere I could go where his digital ghost could not follow. He had moved from my shadow to my doorstep. The psychological game was over. The second act of his horror story had reached its devastating conclusion, and I was left with the most terrifying question of all. He had followed me home. He knew where I slept. He knew where I lived. The digital chase was over. What, then, was he planning to do now that he had finally, truly, caught me? For 2 days, I did not leave my apartment. I lived in a state of self-imposed house arrest, my curtains drawn, my phone turned off and hidden in a drawer. The map from my last run, with its damning gray line leading directly to my home, was seared into my memory. My final sanctuary, the one place I believed he could not reach, had been breached. The knowledge that he knew where I lived was a poison that had contaminated every corner of my home, turning my safe space into a prison cell. The despair was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. He had won. He had systematically stripped away every layer of my security, every ounce of my confidence, until I was nothing but a terrified animal hiding in a box. I was trapped, waiting for the final, inevitable move. Would he knock on my door? Would he send something to my address? The not knowing was a slow, agonizing torture. But something happens when you are pushed into a corner with no hope of escape. The fear, after burning at its brightest, eventually exhausts its fuel. And in the empty, hollowed-out space it leaves behind, something else can begin to grow. By the 3rd day of my self-imposed confinement, my paralyzing terror began to curdle into a cold, diamond-hard rage. A rage at him for his relentless, cruel game. A rage at the world for not believing me, and a rage at myself for letting him reduce me to this. I would not be a prisoner in my own home. I would not live my life waiting for a knock on the door. He had taken my park, my routine, and my peace of mind. I would not let him take my home from me as well. The feeling was a profound, fundamental shift in my very being. The terrified prey was gone, and in her place was a survivor. And a survivor does not wait to be hunted. A survivor sets a trap. My mind, which had been a maelstrom of fear, now became a quiet, focused workshop. I pulled my phone from the drawer and turned it back on. The screen lit up, and the Stride Strong app was still there, a symbol of my torment. But I no longer saw it as his weapon. I now saw it as my own. He had used this app to track me, to intimidate me, to control me. I would use it to find him, to expose him, to end his game once and for all. His weakness was his obsession, his arrogance. He believed I was a predictable variable in his experiment. He expected me to run, to hide, to break. He would not expect me to use the very tool of my oppression as a weapon against him. I began to formulate a plan, a dangerous, reckless gambit that was my only path back to a life that was my own. I would not just run from him anymore. I would lead him. I needed to know who he was. The blank pacer profile was a mask, a shield of anonymity. But I knew he was a real person, likely someone with a deep, obsessive knowledge of running and technology. My new goal was no longer just to escape him, but to identify him. I needed a face. I needed a name. And I would use his own game to get it. I would set myself up as the perfect bait. My plan began to take shape. I would use the app's social features, the ones I had always ignored. I would make my profile public. I would announce a new run, a new goal. But this time, it would be a performance for an audience of one. I would choose a location, a time, and a path designed not for my own training, but for his capture. I was turning his surveillance back on him. This decision was the most terrifying of my life, but it was also the most liberating. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of power. I was no longer just reacting to his moves. I was designing the game board. I was choosing the time and place of our final confrontation. I was no longer a piece in his game. I was now his opponent, an active player who was about to make a move he would not see coming. I spent the rest of the day planning my hunt. I studied maps of the park, looking for the perfect location, a place with limited exits, a place where I could have an advantage. I researched small, discreet cameras, tools to get the proof I needed. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now a focused, weaponized fear. The breaking point had been reached, and I had not broken. I had been forged into something new, something dangerous. My target location was the High Ridge Trail, the most remote and challenging path in the entire park. It was a narrow, winding trail with steep drop-offs on one side and a thick, impenetrable wall of woods on the other. There were few connecting paths, few opportunities for escape. It was a dangerous place to run, but it was a perfect place to corner someone. I would make it seem like I was attempting a new personal record, a feat of endurance that would explain my presence on such a difficult trail. The social feed on the Stride Strong app, which I had always scorned, now became my primary weapon. I switched my profile from private to public. I posted for the first time ever. Going to attempt the High Ridge Trail loop on Tuesday morning, I wrote, my fingers flying across the screen. Shooting for a new personal best. Wish me luck. The post was a public announcement, a piece of cheese in a digital mousetrap, bait for an audience of one. Next, I upgraded my tools. I went back to the electronics store and bought a second spy camera, this one with a wide-angle lens. I also bought a set of small, powerful magnets. My plan was to place one camera at the start of the trail and a second one at a narrow choke point a mile in. I would attach them to the back of metal trail markers with the magnets, making them nearly invisible. I would have 2 chances to get a clear shot of his face. The fear was still a constant companion, but it had changed. It was no longer a paralyzing dread, but a sharp electric current that kept me focused, that kept me alert. I felt a strange sense of clarity, a purpose I hadn't had in weeks. The world was no longer happening to me. I was happening to the world. I was an active force, a hunter preparing her hunting ground for the arrival of her prey. I spent the weekend in a state of intense preparation. I studied the trail map, memorizing every turn, every landmark. I tested the cameras, the battery life, the recording quality. I planned my route not for speed, but for tactical advantage. I was no longer an athlete training for a race. I was a soldier preparing for an ambush, and the enemy was a ghost who thought I was still just a frightened runner. On Monday, I drove to the park in the middle of the day, when it was busy with people. I walked the High Ridge Trail, my movements casual, just another hiker enjoying the afternoon. But I was working. I found the 2 metal trail markers I had identified on the map, and when no one was looking, I attached the 2 small magnetized cameras. They were perfectly hidden. The trap was now set. That night, My last night before the confrontation, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done everything I could. I had a plan. I had my tools. I had chosen the battlefield. The rest was up to him. I knew he would take the bait. His obsession, his arrogance, would not allow him to resist the opportunity to follow me on a new, more challenging route. He would see my public post as an invitation, a sign of my surrender to the game. I laid out my running clothes, just as I had 1,000 times before. But this time, I also laid out my other tools: a fully charged phone, a portable power bank, a small bright flashlight. This was not just a run, it was a mission, and I was as prepared as I could be. I was walking into the heart of my fear, but I was doing it on my own terms, with a plan of my own making. As my 4:30 a.m. alarm buzzed the next morning, I didn't feel the familiar dread. I felt a cold, clear, and dangerous sense of purpose. Today was the day. Today, I would get his face. Today, I would get the proof I needed to end this. I was no longer running from him. I was running towards him, deliberately, with the full intention of dragging him out of the shadows and into the light. I drove to the park in the pre-dawn darkness. A quiet determination settled deep in my bones. I was terrified, but I was also, for the first time in a long time, in control. I was no longer the pawn. I was the opposing queen, about to make a move that would change the entire board. I stepped onto the trail, started the app, and began my final run. I was ready for the pacer. The High Ridge Trail was even more intimidating in the pre-dawn darkness than I had remembered. The path was narrow, the trees pressing in on both sides, their branches like skeletal fingers in the beam of my headlamp. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of unseen life in the undergrowth sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Was it an animal, or was it him, watching me from just beyond the light? I ran with a controlled, steady pace, my fear a cold, hard knot in my stomach. My focus was not on my time, but on the small screen strapped to my arm. For the first mile, the map was clean. It was just my own blue avatar, moving along the winding, digital path. I passed the first trail marker, the one where my first hidden camera was waiting, and I felt a surge of nervous energy. The trap was now active. I was in his territory, but I was also in my own carefully constructed web. The waiting was excruciating. Just after the first mile marker, he appeared. The gray avatar materialized on the screen, right at the start of the trail, exactly as I had hoped. He had taken the bait. The public post, the challenge of a new route, it had been irresistible to him. He was here. He was following me. A cold, triumphant thrill ran through me, momentarily eclipsing my fear. The game was on, and he had just made his first predictable move. I had him. Now came the hardest part. I had to keep running, to maintain the illusion of a normal run. I had to lead him further down the trail, towards my second camera, towards the most isolated part of the park. I had to pretend I was unaware, a simple runner focused on her workout, all while knowing that a real physical person was now on the trail behind me, his phantom footsteps soon to become a reality. My every sense was on fire. I passed the second trail marker, the location of my wide-angle camera. I didn't dare to look at it, to give anything away. I just kept running, my pace steady, my breathing even. I was the bait, the lure, and I had to play my part perfectly. I could feel him behind me, not just as a presence on my screen, but as a weight on the air, a disruption in the quiet of the woods. He was getting closer. I finished the loop, my body screaming from the exertion and the relentless, high-wire tension. As I approached the trailhead where I had started, I risked a glance at the map. His gray avatar was about 1/4 of a mile behind me, moving at a steady, unhurried pace. He was not trying to catch me. He was just following, observing, enjoying his usual, terrifying game. I didn't wait around. I got to my car and drove. Away, my heart pounding with what I had done. The drive home was a blur of adrenaline and anticipation. I had the footage. I knew I had it. Both cameras had been motion activated and had enough battery life for hours. He had walked right past them. I had a clear, undeniable image of his face waiting for me, stored safely in a cloud server he knew nothing about. For the first time, I felt like I had beaten him at his own game of surveillance. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and went straight to my laptop. My hands trembled as I logged into the camera's web portal. There were 2 new video files, one from each camera, each with a timestamp corresponding to my run. I clicked on the first file, the one from the start of the trail. The video was clear, stable. I watched myself run past the screen, a determined, frightened look on my face. I held my breath, my eyes glued to the screen, waiting. A minute passed, then another, and then he walked into the frame. The camera captured him perfectly. He was tall and lean, with the wiry, powerful build of a serious runner. He wore dark, professional running gear, but it was his face that made me gasp. It was gaunt, intense, with eyes that seemed to burn with a cold, obsessive fire. It was the face I had seen in the reflection. I paused the video, the image of his face frozen on my screen. This was him, Thomas Weaver, my tormentor. I stared at his image for a long time, drinking in the details, demystifying the monster. He was just a man, a strange, terrifying man, but a man nonetheless. I took a screenshot, a high-resolution capture of his face. I finally had the proof I needed. I had his face. Now, I needed his story. I took the screenshot and uploaded it to a reverse image search engine. The algorithms churned for a few seconds, cross-referencing the image against billions of others on the internet. Then, the results populated the screen. My breath caught in my throat. There were dozens of hits, most of them leading to old articles, from college sports blogs and local news coverage of marathon results from 5 or 6 years ago. His name wasn't Thomas Weaver, it was Ethan Crow. I clicked on the first link, an old profile piece from a university newspaper. The article lauded him as a rising star in the world of collegiate long-distance running. It called him the Marathon Man, a runner of almost superhuman endurance and discipline. It spoke of his legendary training regimen, his solitary pre-dawn runs, his obsessive focus on pace and timing. I was reading a description of a younger, more celebrated version of myself, but as I clicked through more articles, a darker narrative began to emerge. The tone of the stories shifted from praise to controversy. There were reports of complaints from other runners, accusations of unsportsmanlike conduct. Ethan Crow had a reputation for a strange and cruel psychological tactic. He would single out an opponent, a rival, and he would not just race them, he would break them. His method was described with a chilling consistency across multiple articles. He would fall in step with his chosen opponent, perfectly matching their pace, their breathing, their very form. He would become their perfect, silent echo. For miles and miles, He would run not with them, but at them, a relentless mirroring presence that would slowly, methodically, dismantle their mental fortitude until they broke, their pace faltering, their spirit crushed. He was known as the Pacer. He had been formally reprimanded multiple times, but his behavior continued. The final article was a notice of his ban from all collegiate and professional athletic competitions. He had been disqualified from his final race after his opponent suffered a panic attack on the course, claiming that Ethan's relentless mimicry felt like he was being hunted by his own shadow. The description sent a wave of ice through my veins. He hadn't just been following me. He had been training. This was his sport. This was his art. The psychological destruction of another runner. He had been banned from the official world of racing, but his obsession, his need to compete in this terrible way, had not gone away. He had simply created his own private competition with its own rules, its own arena, and its own single, unwilling participant. He had found me, another disciplined, solitary runner, and had chosen me as his new opponent. The app, the gray avatar, the name Pacer, it was all a deliberate, taunting reference to his own disgraced past. He was recreating his signature method of harassment in a new technological form. The closing distance, the phantom footsteps. It was all a digital version of the same psychological warfare he had waged on the racetrack. He was breaking me down, just as he had broken down all those other runners. I now understood the full, horrifying scope of the situation. I was not being stalked by a simple creep. I was being psychologically dismantled by a disgraced, obsessive athlete who had perfected the art of breaking people. My park was his new stadium. My routine was his new race. And my fear was the trophy. He was trying to win. The game was more intricate, more personal, and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. He wasn't just a ghost in the machine. He was a master of the game. He knew the mental toll of being paced, of being mirrored. He knew the paranoia that came from hearing a second set of footsteps. He had weaponized the very discipline and focus that a runner relies on, turning my own strengths into vulnerabilities. He was a predator who knew his prey intimately because he was, in so many ways, just like me. I looked at the frozen image of his face on my screen, at his intense, burning eyes. I finally had the full picture. I had his name, his face, and his terrible, obsessive history. But this knowledge brought no sense of power, no relief. It only brought a new, more profound level of fear. I was not just being watched by a stranger. I was being competed against by a man whose entire identity was built on the psychological destruction of his rivals, and I was the only rival he had left. The knowledge of his identity settled in my soul like a shard of ice. Ethan Crow, the Pacer. My tormentor was not a random phantom. He was a specialist. He was a man whose life's work was the art of the psychological hunt, and I was his new project. My plan to simply get his photo and go to the police seemed laughably naive now. They hadn't stopped him when he was in the public eye. They would do even less for me, his secret, solitary opponent. There was no escaping him. Changing my route was useless. Deleting the app would be a forfeit. Moving to a new city felt like a temporary solution at best for a man with his obsessive dedication. He had chosen me, and he would not stop until he had broken me, until he had won his sick, private marathon. I was trapped in the final mile of a race I had never agreed to enter, and I knew there was only one way to finish it. My fear, my rage, and my profound exhaustion coalesced into a single terrifying decision. If he wanted a race, I would give him one. I would not be his passive, terrified opponent anymore. I would accept his challenge and meet him on the field of battle. I opened the Stride Strong app, my fingers moving with a calm, steady purpose. I navigated to my public feed, the one he was now following, and I posted a new message. One last. Run, I typed, the words appearing on the screen like a declaration of war. High Ridge Trail, tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. sharp. Let's finish this. It was a direct challenge, a message intended only for him. I was acknowledging his presence, acknowledging the game, and I was setting the time and place for our final confrontation. I was giving him exactly what he wanted, but I would be ready for him this time. That night, I did not sleep. I spent the hours preparing, my mind a cold, clear machine. This would not be a race of speed, but of will. My goal was not to outrun him, but to confront him, to break the spell of his silent, terrifying power. I packed a small running vest, not with water and energy gels, but with the tools of my own desperate strategy, the personal alarms, the strobe flashlight, and a small can of pepper spray. My plan was simple, and it was dangerous. I would run the High Ridge Trail, the most isolated part of the park. I would let him follow me, let him fall into his old, familiar pattern of mimicry. And at the narrowest point of the trail, a place with a steep drop-off where I had previously planted a camera, I would stop. I would turn, and I would face my shadow. I would force the confrontation he had so carefully orchestrated from a distance. As I drove to the park in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But it was no longer in control. I was the one dictating the terms now. I was willingly walking into the arena, not as a victim, but as a warrior. This was my final stand. My one chance to reclaim my life from the ghost who had been haunting it. I arrived at the trailhead and began my warm-up stretches, the familiar routine a comfort in the tense, cold air. I started the Stride Strong app, one last time, my thumb hovering over the Start Run button. I took a deep breath. This was it, the final mile. I pressed the button, started my run, and plunged into the dark, silent woods, my heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. I was ready. He did not disappoint. A half-mile into the run, the gray avatar of the pacer materialized on my screen, falling into its usual position just behind me. A few moments later, I heard them. The soft, rhythmic crunch of his footsteps on the trail, perfectly in sync with my own. He was here. He had accepted my challenge. The final race had begun. I ran with a steady, controlled pace, my breathing even, my form perfect. I did not run like a woman in fear. I ran like a marathoner, a disciplined athlete. I did not look at the screen. I did not look over my shoulder. I just ran, leading him deeper into the woods, closer and closer to the narrow ridge where this nightmare would finally, for better or for worse, come to an end. I reached the narrow ridge, the point I had chosen on the map. On one side was a steep, rocky drop into the darkness. On the other, the dense, impenetrable woods. There was no way around. This was the end of the line. I slowed to a stop, my own footsteps falling silent. And behind me, his footsteps fell silent at the exact same instant. I stood there, my back to him, my heart a wild drum in the silent woods. I took a deep breath, and I turned to face my ghost. He stood about 20 feet away, a tall, lean silhouette just at the edge of my headlamp's beam. I couldn't see his features clearly, just his form, his predatory stillness. He was real, a man of flesh and blood who had been haunting my every step. The moment felt impossibly surreal, a scene from a nightmare made real. We stood there, hunter and hunted, our roles now blurred in the pre-dawn gloom of the isolated trail. "Ethan," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, sharp and clear. "The race is over." I saw him flinch at the sound of his own name. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was a victory. I had stripped him of his anonymity. He was no longer the pacer, the digital ghost. He was Ethan Crow, the disgraced runner, and I knew his name. The power dynamic, for a single brief moment, had shifted. He took a slow step forward, into the beam of my light. His face was just as I had seen it on the camera, gaunt, intense, his eyes burning with a cold, obsessive fire. He had a faint, almost pitying smile on his lips. "The race is never over," he said, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "There is always another mile, always another opponent to break. You were a good opponent, strong, disciplined. You almost made it. That was my signal." I didn't let him say another word. I reached into my vest and pulled the pins from both alarms simultaneously. The world erupted in a piercing, unbearable shriek. At the same moment, I activated the strobe on my flashlight, aiming it directly at his face. The darkness was shattered by a chaotic, disorienting storm of sound and light. I saw him recoil, his hands flying up to his face, his calm demeanor finally breaking. In the strobing, chaotic light, I saw my chance. I grabbed the can of pepper spray. He staggered back, blinded and deafened by my assault. He was no longer the calm, collected predator. He was just a man, disoriented and overwhelmed. He stumbled backwards, towards the edge of the trail, towards the darkness of the woods. And then, in a flicker of the strobe light, he was gone. He had simply vanished into the trees. I stood there, my alarm still shrieking, the strobe light still flashing, my heart pounding. The woods were silent. He was gone. I waited for a long, long time, but he did not reappear. Eventually, I disabled the alarms and the light, plunging myself back into the quiet gray light of the approaching dawn. I was alone. Truly alone for the first time in months. I had won, but it was not a victory. I never ran again. The joy of it, the peace, the solitude. He had taken it all from me, had twisted it into something ugly and terrifying. I sold my running shoes. I deleted the app. I abandoned the park. I had faced my monster, and I had survived. But I had lost the very thing that made me who I was. The ghost was gone, but he had taken the runner with him. I live a different life now, a quieter, more cautious one. I have a job that keeps me indoors. I walk, but I never run. The fear is a constant, low-level hum in my life, a permanent scar left by his psychological warfare. I tell myself it's over, that he was a man who needed a specific game, and that by refusing to play, I have made myself irrelevant to him. I have to believe that to be sane. But last night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from an app I had never seen before. a new fitness tracker that must have been installed in a recent software update. I had never opened it, never created a profile, but the notification was there on my lock screen, clear and undeniable. It was a message that was just for me, a whisper from a ghost I thought I had left behind on that dark trail. It read, "Ready for a run?